Okay, welcome everyone. It's 6:33 p.m. We were set for 6 o'clock to get started, so I will do that. Yes, Steve, I will do that. Um, 1 second, I gotta do one thing. Sorry, just needed to make one more of our presenters co-host. So welcome. I'm the chair of the DFL Environmental Caucus. Uh, we are in the middle of a very active series of legislative forums this year. We have two incredible legislative committee chairs who are just Energizer bunnies and then some this year. So um, how they are able to do as much citizen lobbying as they are and keep up with regular life and everything is just the most incredible thing I've ever seen. So I just want to say a big thank you to Greg Layden and Vita Konitz for everything they are doing, getting out newsletters, presence at the Capitol, making contacts with other nonprofits and legislators. So anyway, so tonight we have a great forum called Resist. I will let Vita and Greg explain a little bit more than that. Just a few things I would like to make as announcements before we get started. After the presentation is over, we will do a, it's everyone. It's a group effort. After the presentations tonight, after the forum, we're going to do a brief caucus meeting. It will be brief, as they always are. So we would appreciate anyone that wants to stick around for that and participate. That would be wonderful. The other thing is just a quick couple of announcements of everything that's coming up. The DFL Business Conference, which is the biennium, is going to be on March 29th in Edina. We are doing a multi-caucus happy hour afterwards with my DFL, the Stonewall DFL, and the DFL Disability Caucus. That's going to be at Wooden Hill Brewing in Edina, so it's just a few minutes away from where the business conference is at Edina High School. So even if you're not an SCC member and attending that, you're very, very, very welcome to come with us. It's a great group of caucuses. The 4 caucuses, we also hosted a couple weeks ago a multi-caucus forum for many of our candidates for that are for DFL leadership office, minus a couple that have minus one, a very important one who has announced since, and we will get to that later, which is Zeta. And so if anyone, I believe that is out being shared for viewing. If it's not, we will get that out soon. So anyone that's on the State Central Committee or not, that's just interested in what's going to be happening on the at the business conference with our potential our candidates for potential leadership, we would invite you to enjoy that. So having said that, I will pass it off to our legislative chairs, Vita Konitz and Greg Layden.
Thank you, Megan. I'll get us started here, and I want to again welcome everyone. We still have people coming in. It was fun. We had to increase our Zoom size for this meeting, and so I hope that's a good sign of things that will continue as people really want to get involved right now. So thank you for joining us. We're calling this forum Resist because, well, you know, when I've been at the Capitol recently, we didn't have a majority in the House. Now we're at least tied, so things are much better. But up to this date, there was a lot of things that we needed to oppose, and we still need to be careful. But hope we have some good things to celebrate too. But I'd like to, of course, here's our chair, Megan Bond. So thank you, Megan, for your nice intro. And I'd like to introduce our presenters. Our first presenter is Steve Schultz. Steve is one of our board members. We have an executive committee with about 21 members. Several board members are on the call here tonight. And Steve is also with government relations with Friends of the Boundaries Waters. I know Chris is off to DC in a couple days. Steve, I'm not sure if you're joining him, but we're really happy to have close allyship with Friends of the Boundary Waters. And so Steve's going to talk to you today about some things that you can do to help protect our pristine waters, and maybe some federal action, maybe some state. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve. And Steve, did you want to share slides? Shall I stop sharing? Or do you just want to talk?
Well, that'd be great. I've got a brief presentation I can give.
Perfect. Thank you. And remember, anyone, if you have questions, to feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. Thank you.
Everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, excellent, great. Get my notes here. All right, so thanks for having me. I'm Steve Schultz. I'm as Vita said, I'm the government relations manager at Friends of the Boundary Waters. We've had our work cut out for us the last few months since President Trump was elected and sworn in. He's taken a lot of different actions that haven't directly said, this is going to open mining for the Boundary Waters, but we expect that specific action to be coming soon. We've seen legislation introduced at the federal level and some at the state level that would make it a lot easier for sulfide mining to take place in the Boundary Waters. But before I get too big into that, I'll just do a brief introduction of who we are and what we do, and then I'll get mostly into federal stuff. But I could talk a little bit about what we're doing at the state level too. So just briefly, the Boundary Waters is 1.2 million acres of nearly 25% of it is fresh water. So lots of beautiful, clean, pristine wilderness. Over 250,000 people visit the Boundary Waters each year. And we're also working to prevent pollution towards Lake Superior with the Polymet mine proposal. And we want to make sure Lake Superior is also protected. That's 10% of the world's fresh water. So we have our mission is to protect the Boundary Waters wilderness. So we do that through advocacy and conservation. We also want to connect people with the wilderness through education programs, especially for students. And community is a very important part of our mission. We want to be a part of the communities that are at the gateways to the Boundary Waters, make sure that those communities are thriving so they can also support the wilderness. Pardon me. So there's two threats right now to the Boundary Waters. The main one that the federal action is looking at is the Twin Metals mine in the northern part of this picture, the yellow part up there. And then there's also the Polymet mine. Which straddles the watersheds for the Rainy River, which is the Boundary Waters, and that water flows north, and then the St. Louis River watershed, which flows right into Lake Superior. So all three of those are all three of those watersheds are threatened. There's also the Talon mine to the south that threatens the Mississippi River as well. So. But the one for federal action that's being highlighted is the Twin Metals mine, which is just a very short distance from the actual wilderness. And again, right upstream from some of the cleanest water in the world, right in our backyard. So this is what some of that acid mine drainage can look like. It turns the water to this ugly orange blob. I'll keep that just to the soil here, not other orange blobs that are affecting the Boundary Waters. But when the sheer amount of water in northern Minnesota makes this type of mining, sulfide mining, incompatible with the wilderness if we want to keep it pristine. So this is a picture. The top picture is like maybe what you picture when you think of copper mining, big hunks of copper, and they're getting in there with their pitchforks and taking it out. But up north, it's not that. It is called disseminated copper ore. And that means that there isn't like 30% of the rock is ore, not 10%, 5%, some cases not even 1%. It's less than 0.5%. So if you think about it, to get just a pound of copper, you'd have to crush over, thousands of pounds of rock, and it just doesn't make sense for stuff economically. We don't know how they're going to make money on this without breaking our laws or paying people less than what they need to live on. And also, it doesn't with that much waste and so much water around, you're bound to have big problems, and we don't want to see that happen. So the basic interaction is you've got sulfide in the rock that interacts with air or oxygen, and then it also interacts with water to create sulfuric acid. And so instead of having a mine, say with iron ore mining, there is problems there, there is sulfates there, but it's not to the extreme as this. We can prevent that sulfate from iron ore mining. Do we? Not all, unfortunately, not all the time, and it does cause problems. But this type of pollution sticks around for possibly hundreds of years. You'll have a pit of basically battery acid just sitting there right outside of the boundary waters. And we don't want to see that, obviously. So currently, right now, there's a 20-year mineral withdrawal or a ban on mining, taking those minerals out of federal lands. And that includes all of the boundary waters, the Superior National Forest, in the Superior National Forest. So we want to keep that in place. But unfortunately, like I said, those elections happen. And unfortunately, we have President Trump in place. Before I get into that, we are supporting Representative Betty McCollum's bill, HR 588, the Boundary Waters Wilderness Protection and Pollution Prevention Act. It's a mouthful, but descriptive. Unfortunately, we don't think this bill is really going anywhere at least right now, given the fact that the Republicans are in control of the House of Representatives. But we are still, we look at this work as building a movement. It's not just one moment in time. So we are, when we are out in Washington, D.C., I was just there actually last week from Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. My boss, Chris, is out there this week. So we plan on tag teaming, folks. I met with more than 30 offices in 2 days, which is the most I've ever done in 2 days. Quick meetings, thankfully. They were only like 10, 15 minutes long, but I was running. I got my steps in those days. And we are getting folks to sign on to this bill, but what we're really doing is opposing Representative Stauber's bill. Representative Stauber from Congressional District 8 has ironically introduced the bill, the Superior National Forest Restoration Act. When I think of restoration, I don't think of sulfide mining, but he considers it restoring their ability to gain access to these minerals, I guess. And we're also opposing any administrative action from the Trump administration, which he could take immediate action through an executive order, or we could go through the appropriate process, working through a comment period, doing scientific research, really rigorous, getting the scientist in there to figure out. He's not going to do that, unfortunately. He might have his administration pretend to do it, but if they actually looked at science, they would know that sulfide mining and the boundary waters are incompatible. You just can't have those two together because sulfide mining there's never been a sulfide mine that has not polluted. They are, according to the EPA, the most polluting industry in the country, and they have a perfect record of pollution. We've never seen a mine that hasn't polluted. So we don't want that anywhere near the clean water of the boundary waters or Lake Superior, for that matter. So here's just a picture of the bill introduced by Representative Stauber, and you can also see Representative Finstead and Fischbach right there up on top as well from Western and Southern Minnesota. So what is HR 978? It's again introduced by Pete Stauber, reverses that 20-year ban on mining, reinstates Twin Metals leases, which is the Shell mining company they say they're a Minnesota company. They're owned by Antofagasta, which is a Chilean company, and so it reinstates their leases, which were taken away by the Biden administration. It's this is one of the most ridiculous parts of the bill. It requires that the government do environmental review in 18 months. And to kind of put it in perspective, the Polymet mine that I was talking about that was a little further south of Twin Metals, they've been doing environmental review for about 18 years, and they still don't have any of their permits in place. So they want to reduce that to 18 months while also cutting scientists at the EPA. Remember, they're slashing staff at all the federal agencies. So it's just not possible. And then it also prohibits judicial review. So if this becomes law, we wouldn't be able to sue, even though we know we would have standing on so many different things. And we would probably sue just for the fact that this is kind of, getting against those whole checks and balances. I kind of get into a little bit of this already, but it weakens environmental review, prevents citizens the right to sue. That 18-month timeline is just impossible to meet. And if you don't meet it, it kind of makes it a de facto permit, which again is ridiculous. So what are we doing to stop this? Well, we are building opposition in Congress. Like I said, I met with about 30 or 35 offices of the last couple of days, made sure that well, I met with one Republican who said they're going to look at the information, but we'll see. But didn't talk to a single Democrat that isn't opposing Stauber's bill. We would need all the Democrats plus a couple of Republicans. So I am meeting with those those Republicans who are in closer districts. Maybe we think a clean water. This bill is very radical, and if their constituents knew about that, they might think twice about voting for them. So we're hoping to maybe we won't get them to sign on to Representative McCollum's bill, but maybe during caucus or something, they might say, this bill's a little too controversial for my district, and that alone, given the tight margins in the House, might help us out. But there were two Democrats last year that flipped and voted for this, so we're meeting with those offices as well to try to get them back on the good side here. We are also, activating our Citizen Action Network. So any types of calls, emails, letters to the editor, we need all of that to stop Representative Stauber's bill. And once this gets to the Senate, it would still need 60 votes. Unless they pull some chicanery and try to mix it into the Budget Reconciliation Act. But we've talked to different lawyers, and they've said that wouldn't be legal. That doesn't always stop them, though, from just bowling forward. But we have also heard that leader John Thune does not want to fire the parliamentarian, which is inside lingo for just pushing that through and saying, no, we're going to put this through for 50 votes instead of 60 votes. So if they don't do that, they do not have 60 votes. So we're good. And I met with our Senator Smith's staff, and they are going to work all of their relationships to make sure that this doesn't get any Democratic support in the Senate if and when it gets there. Like I said, we're also going to Washington, D.C. We were there in January. We're going to be there. We were there this month. We're heading out again this summer and this fall to make sure that we're getting full support from all the Democrats against Stauber's bill, and then hopefully getting a couple of Republicans to get on our side as well. And here, how can you get involved? Well, grassroots advocacy is the best way for us to stop this stuff. At least be a thorn in the side of Pete Stauber and Michelle Fischbach and Finstad and Emmer. So even if you're in one of those districts, it's nice to give them a call and just kind of make sure they know that we're out there and we care about clean water, we care about our wilderness, we care about public lands. These lands belong to all of us, not some Chilean mining company. So give them a call. You can join our Citizen Action Network. We meet every 2 weeks. On Wednesdays at 6 p.m. They're either in person or virtual, so hybrid, depending on where you are. If you can't get into our office, we almost always have stuff to do virtually as well. And then, like I said, give a call, email. You can the website on the bottom here is how to find out who your legislators are at the state and federal level to give a call. A couple things coming up. Like I said, Citizen Action Network. We're going to have a rally at the Capitol on Earth Day, along with climate justice. They'll be having a bunch of tables. We'll have speakers in the rotunda. We hope this is going to be a great day and encourage everybody to get out to the Capitol on Earth Day. Here's my contact information. If you're interested, make sure you feel free to give me a call or send. I guess it's my email. Send me an email and I'll get back to you. And so that's what I have for our federal work. Are there any, do we want to do questions now, or are we going to save them for later?
Thank you, Steve. I have not been monitoring for that. I'm not sure if any have come in the chat. That's really good information. Would you be able to put your slides in the chat for folks to have all that contact info?
Yes, yeah, sure. I'll drop my contact info in there for sure.
Or your slides if you like, whatever you'd like to, so they can reach out, because I'm sure there are people that will want to get involved. Greg, Megan, do we have time for one question, or shall we move on?
I have a question, which is who flipped in the House? What Democrats?
Yes, it was Jared Golden out of Maine, Maine's first congressional district. He has a lot of mining in his district, trying to figure out why he flipped. That's one reason. He's also on the same committee as Representative Stauber. They're both on the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee and the Natural Resources Committee. So I don't know if they're, like scratching each other's backs. I'm not sure about that. And then the other one was Dan Goldman out of Manhattan, New York.
Seriously?
Yes. So no clue why. I don't know if he hit the wrong button or
He hit the
what.
wrong button.
Yeah,
Well,
I
let's
don't, I
hope.
am not sure, but yeah, we want to get both of them back on the good side, like I said.
Thank you. And you guys had an amazing hearing at the Minnesota Senate. The room
Yes.
was overflowing. I don't know if you saw the pictures or the videos. Bob Tamman, who's on this call, testified. It was excellent. So thank you for all your work. All right, if you could stop sharing, I'll introduce our next panelist. Thank you. And let me do this quick. All right, our next panelist is Hudson Kingston. He is coming to us from Cure, Minnesota. The Environmental Caucus has a history of working with Cure. They're an amazing group that focuses in different areas: climate, energy, rural democracy, water, and connecting people with nature. So we're really, really pleased to have Hudson here with us, who is a legal director. I had reached out, originally interested in his work with NEPA or NEPA, NEPA. And we've got lawyers on this call that I think understand this is a very, very important landmark environmental legislation. So let's have Hudson explain to us why we need to make sure that's not rolled back. And it relates very much to the work that Steve's doing. And I think he's also going to talk about some climate connections. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. And I do want to mention Hudson, I read, was the attorney that helped the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute in their fight to make sure that they were able to keep that the roof depot. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, I'll stop sharing so you can share your slides.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. For long time hearer about her, first time caller. I really appreciate getting to talk to you. I'm contacting you guys from just outside of Ely, Minnesota. So it is furiously snowing on my internet. So you guys let me know if you can't hear me or can't see me for any reason, and I'll stop sharing my slides. This is my first time at this meeting, and I'm going to start off by committing a party foul. I'm putting a lot of information in the chat so that you can access it while I'm talking. So feel free to click on things. They are listed 1 through 6, but there's multiple links. Now that I've seen Steve's presentation, I realize you're a very wonky group. You like challenging and complicated policy issues, so I hope my presentation's good. If not, I gave it the old college try, I suppose. But I will try to share my screen now. There's always technical difficulties, right? So I will now put it in presentation mode. Oh, will I put it in present? Okay, and then I will try to fix what I'm sharing. There we go. Okay, is this sharing the right thing, Vita?
Looks great.
Great. Okay. My presentation, mostly about NEPA, but I will cover other topics, is called NEPA is Dead. Long Live NEPA, Environmental Review and You. This is just a joke. There's the old saying, the king is dead, long live the king, in places that have kings. And similarly, there's something very bad is about to happen to NEPA, but it is not going away. I want you all to know that. Cure, as Vita was saying, is a rural nonprofit organization made up of people who care about the well-being of their neighbors, the health of the land and the water, and the legacy we leave for future generations. We had started off as a clean water organization, and we've evolved quite a lot. We do a lot of clean energy work. We do a lot of energy democracy work in rural areas, and we are starting to work on things like public lands, including different types of exploitation, like the new gas rules and things like that. So we have so much we could talk about. But I am going to talk mostly about NEPA today. And for folks who are wondering what the heck NEPA is, it's the National Environmental Policy Act. It's 55 years going. It first was written in 1969 and took effect on January 1st, 1970. Thank you, President Nixon. Thanks for signing that. For nearly a decade, the statute was interpreted by courts and federal agencies with a wide diversity of outcomes. Agencies lost cases left and right. They couldn't get anything done. There were 70 different interpretations of the law. Nothing made sense. It was chaos. Hooray, the 70s. And President Jimmy Carter decided maybe chaos wasn't the right way to do things. So he passed or he put out an executive order saying that there would be a centralized set of rules by the Council on Environmental Quality, an entity created by NEPA, and those would be the baseline rules for all agencies. Instead of chaos, we would have rules of the road. All agencies would know what they had to do to comply with the law. Great idea. So for about 40 years, those rules prevailed with minor changes, just very minor tweaks here and there. And the CEQ added to the rules by doing a lot of guidance documents on things like environmental justice, what cumulative impacts means. They made the law better by explaining how to best deal with it. So NEPA has been improved and evolved over the years. It's gotten a lot better. Then the first Trump administration happened, and they threw out all the rules and they rewrote them themselves, and it was a pretty big shock to the system, one that was very concerning at the time. In 2023, the actual statute, the real law underlying the rules, was amended with language by Joe Manchin and his friends, another big shock to the system. So the statute is now changed. And then in 2024, the Biden administration rewrote the rules again and does a pretty good job. Things are looking up. So what has happened in the last couple of months? Well, as I said, in 1978, Jimmy Carter passed an executive order that said there will now be rules across the board. Donald Trump, being president, can just get rid of that executive order. And he canceled that executive order on day one in his energy dominance executive order. He said the Carter executive order is gone. There will no longer be any CEQ rules. CEQ has to get rid of them. On about a month later, on February 25th, the CEQ started the process of removing their rules, and they gave us about a month to comment. So comments are due on March 27th, this Thursday, 4 days from today. So, is NEPA dead? No, NEPA is not dead. I want everyone to calm down. But the NEPA statute still exists. So removing the across-the-board rules doesn't eliminate the agency duties to comply with NEPA. It does not get rid of EISs. It does not get rid of environmental review. It does not put us back to the state of nature we were in the 1960s when rivers were lighting on fire and really bad and questionable decisions were being made by the government with no oversight from the public. If anything, getting rid of these rules will mean more chaos for the government when they are trying to approve projects or do things. Lots of potential for litigation, much less certainty for industry and government. You would think that maybe they wouldn't do this, but they apparently want chaos. But unfortunately, it's not all fun and games. There are huge amounts of collateral damage by getting rid of these rules. The 2020 and 2024 rules had finally acknowledged the role of tribes in agencies' decision-making processes, and now that is going away. Projects like PolyMet, which Steve was talking about, were in NEPA review for 10 plus years. A lot of the great stuff that Steve was saying came from that process. Like all the hard facts that he knows about how bad this project is because there was a NEPA review for more than 10 years. And it took that long because the first environmental review was so bad that the EIS, or that the EPA rather, gave it a failing grade and told them to do it again, which is not common, but it happens. Folks who are tracking this issue, which I think is all of you guys, will know that the Red River diversion was a huge fight between North Dakota and Minnesota at the end about a dam permit. And projects like that now will not be resolved through dialogue between states. It will not have an administrative agency process. It'll end up in the courts, and it'll be confusing, and there will be lots of misunderstanding, because if you can't do a proper environmental review, you cannot reach common understanding. NEPA was the only real government initiative that we have that looked at cumulative impacts and environmental justice. And this is because of Paul Wellstone. In the 90s, he tried to pass a statute that would have given us actual law on environmental justice, and it failed to pass in Congress. And so he turned right around and he said, Bill Clinton, you're going to put environmental justice into NEPA. And that's the best we've been able to do. And we can all thank Paul Wellstone for that. But that is now in danger. And agencies will not know how to coordinate with one another. all the permitting reform and streamlining and all these initiatives we've had from Obama through Biden to make these projects go better and make more sense are all just going to be thrown out with the bathwater now. It's a mixed and very stupid bag of consequences. But I'm here to say NEPA is love, and that is a t-shirt that I have from my work at the CEQ, which I'm currently wearing. And that's a photo of me in 2017 at the Women's March in St. Paul. NEPA has benefited us all in our lives. It has been a part of the polymet fight. It is why the post office in your community isn't stupidly big or poorly designed. It has had so many impacts across the board in every part of American life for 55 years. And it is a fundamental part of government transparency and democracy. It results in better overall outcomes when stakeholders are heard out rather than being forced to just shut up and take what industry wants to give them. Some of the biggest environmental and non-environmental cases of your lifetime were NEPA cases. So for example, the timber wars in Oregon and Washington, everyone knows that that's an Endangered Species Act case, but it actually wasn't. It was a NEPA case. The fact that we know that the Customs and Border Patrol patrols our border with Canada with Predator drones is only because it was found in a NEPA document, and then the CBC freaked out and reported on it. NEPA has even protected you and your family from space mercury raining down on you for the rest of history. I put a link in the chat to explain that one because that's a little bit more of a story. Minnesota and other states have already commented in this docket and pointed out that the erosion of NEPA will harm implementation of state-level NEPAs like our own Minnesota Environmental Policy Act. So currently changing NEPA doesn't immediately change MEPA, but I assure you that as soon as it is gutted at the federal level, they will come for it at the state level. The state's comment also sought 90 more days to comment. It seems extremely unlikely they will get those 90 more days. So currently, I just checked, nearly 40,000 comments have been submitted so far. Kira is asking folks to join us, and link number 2 that I put in the chat is our action alert on that. So please consider making a NEPA comment. We tried to make it a lot easier than the ways that the government gave. The government would like you to send them a fax, but we made a website so you could do it more easily. Other federal defense. So now I'm pivoting hard away from NEPA. Since 2008, there has been a tax credit to support carbon capture and sequestration, which is the oil industry's solution for climate change. It is taking the emissions of fossil fuel generation and shoving a little bit of it underground in places like North Dakota, usually to extract oil. 99% of the time, it is used to get more oil out of the ground that would be otherwise inaccessible. Recently, the IRA, again, thanks to our friend Joe Manchin, increased the tax credit substantially. So he sweetened the deal for the oil industry. There's a bipartisan bill right now that would remove this credit, stopping your taxes from being wasted on a false climate solution that really only benefits the fossil fuel industry and incentivizes them to push their waste down a hole. Cure views this as a false climate solution because it's only justifiable if you ignore the clean energy revolution. It only makes sense if you just want to keep business as usual and add a few extra tubes to it. But unfortunately, it also is extremely costly, and it cannot scale up large enough to actually eliminate climate change impacts. So it's a false solution because it is a big waste of money that goes into oil industry pockets and doesn't stop climate change. They used to call this clean coal, and they stopped doing that. They came up with new branding. They are always coming up with new names for things. It's the same darn thing. So again, link number 3 that I put in the chat is our action alert on the federal legislation that would get rid of this tax credit that incentivizes this technology. Other federal stuff we're looking at, we have done a lot of work with the Freedom of Information Act, and we are very concerned with things happening at the USDA. So truth is more important than ever right now. We will continue working with national and Minnesota groups to get information under the Freedom of Information Act and get it to the public. Two examples that I put in the chat, I guess they're number 4. Shortly before the new administration, we learned through FOIA that EPA was enforcing Minnesota sulfate standard that has never really been enforced by the state agencies under the EPA. And now I believe that's on hold, but getting that information out makes it real, makes it an actual thing that can't be rolled back quite as easily. And also during the Biden administration, we used FOIA to unveil the oil industry plan to do carbon capture and shove carbon waste under national forests in places like Louisiana and Texas. We are also deeply concerned about the funding at USDA being clawed back. We are going to continue to watch the issue and try to get more information out about it. Cure just posted a link today, a few hours ago, which is a 12-minute interview with a farmers market organizer in Virginia, Minnesota. So I encourage you to check us out on Facebook and get to see that video. Other important issues. So this is no longer federal. We have to keep pushing at the state, and that should say local. We have to keep pushing at the state and local level to keep our standards high and not let backsliding occur. Check out the link to the opinion piece in the chat. I think that's number 5. Cure is currently working with Sierra Club, Citizens Utility Board, and the Minnesota government on Minnesota Power's attempt to sell itself to BlackRock's subsidiary company. This is a very big attack on the idea of public ownership of our energy system. Taking this company private could have really bad negative effects for Minnesota Power customers. It also could have set a precedent for other utilities. So we encourage you to check out the links in number 6. There are public meetings coming up. Tomorrow, there's one at the Duluth City Council. If you're in Duluth, go to that public meeting, say something. And there in early April, there are numerous public meetings, including a virtual one that all of you can attend and comment during to talk about BlackRock taking over Minnesota Power. Thank you for having me. Like I said, I'm new to this group. I hope that was useful information. We can talk about data centers if you guys want to, but I've already slammed you with a ton of information, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Hudson. Yeah, that was a lot of information, but very important information and a lot of federal things that we need to hear about. So thank you. Greg, do we have, or Megan, do we have any questions that you want to pull up?
I just want to say that we are going to try to, I'm asking the speakers, the speakers all have emails from me asking them for this, but we're going to try to get all this into a newsletter and get it out really soon so that these links will be there to all of our members, even if they're not here.
Good. And I've been putting them in the chat too, if you want to grab them now, but just know there will be a follow-up email with everyone who was in attendance or registered. Thank you so much. All right. And with that, I will introduce our next speaker. So we're going to go get to some Minnesota stuff here next. Trevor Russell is a friend from Friends of the Boundary Waters, excuse me, Friends of the Mississippi River, wrong friend. And I've had the pleasure of working with this group when I was teaching, doing volunteer work, planting trees with students, pulling buckthorn. I know they do some very important work. And I also got to see Trevor's great forum he did recently on sustainable aviation fuel. So I invited him here today to talk more about that issue that we're hearing more and more about as a climate fix, but is it really is kind of what I want Trevor to address. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Trevor. And with that, I'll stop sharing so you can do your slides.
Thank you so much, Vita. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present to this group. I'm going to attempt to screen share and we'll see if it works. And if not, I will just find a workaround. And can you see?
Yep, it's there.
Do you see my slide notes and the presentation?
Yeah, put it on presenter view and then we'll
Yeah.
only see the presentation.
It's a weird system over here, so I will do my best to just do
It's good. Now I just see an airplane.
this. Okay. So do we
Yes.
see a slide now that looks like Minnesota greenhouse gas emissions
Correct.
Yes.
by sector? Excellent. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm on two different screens here. So if I'm looking over here, it's looking at slide notes. But I want to just maybe introduce quickly Friends of the Mississippi River. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Mississippi River and its watershed in Minnesota. And our water program works at the nexus of ag, water quality, and climate to try to advance solutions to some of our most pressing environmental challenges. FMR is engaged in sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, because in recent decades, U.S. transportation emissions reductions have focused largely on biofuels. And as a result, transportation biofuels policies and incentives have become some of the nation's most influential agricultural policies. And so as we aim to develop policies and technology that shifts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our transportation sector, that becomes very important to our shared work. Within Minnesota's greenhouse gas emissions portfolio, transportation is our largest emitting sector at about 29% of all emissions, followed closely by agriculture at 25%. Similarly, at the national level, when we think about the share of emissions within the overall transportation sector, about 9% of those emissions are specific to aviation. And when we think about aviation, according to the 2021 U.S. Aviation Climate Action Plan, about 97% of all emissions in the aviation sector are from the combustion of jet fuel. This is primarily commercial aircraft, some small general aviation aircraft or private aircraft, and the remaining emissions coming from some airport operations and a very small number of aviation gasoline piston engine aircraft. But what I want you to know is when we talk about aviation sector emissions, what we're talking about is burning fuel. Looking ahead, so flight demand is expected to accelerate further. If nothing changes, aviation emissions would approximately double by 2050. While the industry is investing in newer fleets, new technology, operational efficiencies, industry modeling suggests those investments at best can only serve to slow the growth in aviation emissions. Since commercial and freight flights are very unlikely to electrify because batteries are really heavy, the only feasible pathway to dramatically reducing emissions in the commercial aviation space for now is through lower carbon fuels. With that in mind, in 2022, the U.S. launched the Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF, Grand Challenge with the goal of producing 3 billion gallons of SAF per year, with a minimum life cycle greenhouse gas emissions reduction of 50%, and to produce the full suite needed 35 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel to power the aviation sector by 2050. 35 billion gallons is a lot. If those gallons come from cropland biofuels, the SAF Grand Challenge could very well be the single most important, influential agricultural policy in a generation. If we do this well, it could be an important environmental improvement. If we do this poorly, it could create severe unintended consequences. So that is, you might be curious, why a river conservation organization is closely engaged in sustainable aviation fuel policy. When we think about the types of SAF, this could be a semester-long college course. We won't get into it. I'll share some links at the end of this presentation. For now, I'm going to focus on just two main types of SAF that are what I would call the sort of first generation SAF pathways that are most likely to end up in your airplane wing sometime in the next few years. And that is ethanol and winter annual oilseeds. When we think about ethanol, by the way, this is a real sculpture in Atlanta's airport. One of the cheapest, most technologically feasible, readily accessible pathways for producing SAF is the alcohol to jet pathway, which is essentially turning corn ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. And there are some advantages here. It's an abundant feedstock. We have existing infrastructure. It's reasonably cost effective over time, especially with federal tax credits in play. And to qualify, corn would likely need to be produced using reduced tillage, optimum nutrient management, cover crops, all of which would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the crop, allowing it to achieve that 50% life cycle greenhouse gas emissions reduction that it has to meet to qualify. But each of those practices also helps improve water quality and soil health. So a SAF approach that relies on sort of dominant cropping systems like corn could reduce aviation emissions, but it could also have unintended consequences for water quality. If done poorly, producing too much SAF from these crops would require a large increase in agricultural production, and agricultural acreage, would increase fertilizer and herbicide pollution, reduce soil health, compromise conservation lands, and diversify or sort of have the effect of putting downward pressure on our broader goal of diversifying crop rotations in our agricultural sector and result in fewer choices for farmers. If done well, row crop based SAF, if kept to the same acreage that we have for corn today, is an economic opportunity that might modestly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector and improve water quality, because producers would be required en masse to adopt cover crops, no-till, optimum nutrient management practices that we've been unable to secure at scale for decades. So there's promise and there's peril there. A really promising opportunity is winter annual oilseeds. These are a terrific low-carbon feedstock. These are crops under development through the University of Minnesota's Forever Green Initiative. They are planted in the fall, they germinate, they overwinter, they're bred specifically for our climate, and in the spring, they reemerge to produce oil seeds that can be harvested before the following summer's crop goes in. It is a cover crop, but instead of a cover crop that you would till in or kill off with pesticide in the spring, it's a cover crop that you harvest and use. It is a market-based cover crop. This is a very new concept in our agricultural space. We're really excited to be part of the group that's bringing this forward. So again, these are cover crops. They overwinter. You harvest them in the spring before, say, your soybean might go in an agricultural rotation. They produce about 1,500 pounds of oil seeds per acre with a very high oil content of 35 to 40%. And sustainable aviation fuel from these crops has an ultra low carbon intensity, up to 70% lower than conventional jet fuel. They also have tremendous benefits for water quality and soil health. And as you see in this center photograph, these are bright yellow, pollinator-friendly crops that are flowering very early in the spring, right when our pollinators are emerging. And this could be really the key to helping rebound our pollinator populations in Minnesota. Specifically for water quality, again, I work with a river organization. These sort of winter annual oil seeds are remarkable for water quality, up to a 97% reduction in nitrate loss from fields that are growing camelina compared to fields that do not. So it is a sustainable aviation fuel biofuel source that is drop-in ready for aviation applications, and is great for water quality, it's great for soil health, it's great for pollinators, and it's also great for farmers. Farmers who grow these crops have a chance to make more money per acre than they would otherwise. There is a slight yield drag to soybeans that follow. So, if you're growing camelina in the spring, your soybeans are going to go in a little bit later, so you're going to get slightly fewer soybeans per acre than you normally would in terms of total yield, but you've got all of that camelina oil, and because camelina is so prolific on a per acre basis, a producer that wants to produce oil would produce about 50% more oil per acre growing a camelina soybean rotation than just with soybeans themselves. As a result, this unlocks a significant additional revenue stream for producers without requiring any more farmland. And that is really the promise of winter annual oil seeds in the sustainable aviation fuel space, and that's why we're working on it. Don't look too closely here. I'll share the link to the report that this comes from, but because we see long-term demand for winter annual oil seeds, being able to supply the sustainable aviation fuel feedstock demand in 2023 We were part of a report along with the University of Minnesota that looked at sort of a high, medium, and low adoption scenario for winter annual oilseeds in this space. And under a medium adoption scenario, we would expect about 5.5 million acres of camelina on the ground by 2050. And under the high adoption scenario, a little under 10 million acres, about 9 million acres on the ground. That would dramatically improve water quality, soil health, and pollinator health in Minnesota. And I'll just say this isn't pie in the sky. This is real. So last September, a Delta flight left Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. I was fortunate enough to be there when it did. It's the plane that is closest to us in the top right photograph. That plane left Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, flew to New York for Climate Week, and was powered entirely by Minnesota-grown camelina sustainable aviation fuel. How do we get this right? So last summer, Friends of the Mississippi River, the Nature Conservancy, Fresh Energy teamed up to engage leaders in all sectors to try to get this right and optimize progress towards the most sustainable aviation fuels and away from the least sustainable aviation fuels. Our hope is that Minnesota can establish a leadership role in this space, absent our ability to count on strong federal leadership to prioritize the most sustainable options. In terms of short-term action at the state level, the governor's budget recommendation did formalize a goal of 11 million gallons of SAF per year by 2028 at MSP, and by 2035, 1 million acres of winter annual oilseeds, that camelina or pennycress crops, by 2035. His recommendation also included 1.4 million a biennium for PCA permitting and environmental review staff to accelerate adoption of the infrastructure necessary to build out these systems, and an additional $10.6 million in addition to our existing state production tax incentive for SAF production. It also made a minor improvement by scaling the tax credit specifically to the degree of carbon intensity improvement compared to petroleum that those sustainable aviation fuels can achieve. So basically 2 cents per additional percent reduction above and beyond that 50% threshold. And state legislation linked here, and you'll have access to those links when I share this document, is moving those initiatives forward. We are also working with lawmakers in both chambers to explore some additional alterations to the tax credit as proposed. The first would be providing an additional 20 cents per gallon for sustainable aviation fuel produced from those winter annual oilseeds to send a really strong market signal to producers that this is the most sustainable pathway for SAF and the one we think they should invest in. We're also looking at some prohibitions. Prohibiting any fuels from qualifying as SAF if they are utilizing carbon capture for enhanced oil recovery, as Hudson talked about earlier. We also want to prohibit any feedstock, biofuel feedstock, from qualifying as sustainable aviation fuel if they are from newly converted lands. So we don't want to tear down wetlands or prairies or forests, grow crops, and call those feedstocks sustainable. So we are aiming to prohibit tax credits from going to any feedstock grown on croplands without at least 10 years prior cropping history. And we also want to amend the rules and law to prohibit the importation of used cooking oil. The concern we've heard from multiple sectors is that it is very difficult to divine the provenance of any used cooking oil, and we're concerned that the U.S. is increasing the rate at which we are importing used cooking oil from overseas, the bulk of which is palm oil. And so we run the risk of incentivizing a scenario where rainforests are chopped down, palm plantations are put in, that oil is then captured, shipped to the US, sold to us as used cooking oil, and we would convert that into sustainable aviation fuel. And now what we're doing is subsidizing deforestation. And so we feel like these 3 prohibitions, along with the additional winter annual oilseed credit bonus, would be a means of steering Minnesota's sustainable aviation fuel policy in a slightly better direction. There is more to this story. You're free to look at a SAF webinar that Friends of the Mississippi River put on for our members last fall. The SAF principles that FMR, TNC, and Fresh Energy put together. I also put that link in the chat earlier, and a little bit more information on how clean water crops like winter oilseeds, camelina, and pennygrass could fuel your flights in the future. All of that is available online, and I will include this information in what we share with the group. So that is a little bit from Friends of the Mississippi River on the promise and perils of sustainable aviation fuel.
Thank you, Trevor. And it is complicated, right? Are they just going to take the cheaper option and do the corn ethanol, or are they going to try to find a more sustainable, truly sustainable solution? And then, we do have to say, and one of our guests put a note to me in the chat, is we need to remember that if we can reduce those air miles, and choose alternatives like fast rail, there is more that we could do to reduce our carbon emissions, right? Try to just like driving less and flying less would also, of course, be helpful. But
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vita, and just quickly on that, I mean, there are sort of two pillars to our approach to this work: fly less and fly better. And I didn't get into it in this presentation, but investments in, intercity high-speed rail initiatives or other, clean transportation strategies are one element of the work. But for the share of flights that are going to continue to happen, we do need to find a way to reduce the emissions in those, so we can hold both of those as dual goals, working towards them in concert.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. Very informative. Are there any questions that we want to do now? Greg?
The questions are just really complicated about this issue, which is, I think, what people are seeing that, and you mentioned it, our speakers mentioned it, is that we have the problem that you can do this wrong or do this right. And with respect to how these crops are grown, the fact that there seems to be a virus has insinuated itself into human brains that we must grow corn and nothing else, and as long as corn is the only solution. Phil, do you want to say something about corn?
Sure. My question is, this cover crop, do you plant corn, soybeans, or a regular summer crop, and the cover crop is a winter crop in addition to? And corn generates about 560 gallons of ethanol on average per acre. What does the cover crop generate per acre?
Phil, it's a great question. So because winter annual oilseeds are planted in the fall and they are harvested in the spring, they grow on really the same acres that any other traditional summer annual cropping system would be operating on. So soybeans, corn, beets, wheat are the sort of the big four in Minnesota. There are other crops that I could mention, but in essence, each of those are typically planted in the spring and are harvested in the fall. From October to November to January, February, March, April, May, those acres are unvegetated. And that is what we call the big brown spot. We can see that on satellite imagery. That is why we have the water quality and habitat challenges we have in Minnesota. We have denuded the landscape for 7 to 8 months a year. This is a crop that fits in and provides green growing vegetation that covers that big brown spot, but doesn't displace what farmers would typically otherwise be able to grow during the normal summer growing season. In essence, we're taking acres to produce a low carbon fuel when those acres are otherwise not being used. It's almost like parking your car in the bank parking lot at 5 p.m. and taking it out at 8 a.m. You're using the same amount of land for a second purpose that isn't conflicting with the original purpose. And that's why these crops were designed this way, specifically so that producers that are in a typical corn soy rotation, which is the 16 million acres out of the about 20 million acres of row crops in Minnesota are in that rotation, they could easily adopt these cropping systems without too much effort. With regard to ethanol, we won't make this all about ethanol. We as a water quality organization have our concerns about the water quality implications of ethanol. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that's on this call. We do believe that as we transition away from petroleum towards electrification, we're going to free up about 36 million acres US domestically of current corn production that isn't going to go to ethanol anymore, provided that we don't start exporting our ethanol, and that's a whole other webinar. For the near term, we think that some downward pressure on ethanol for gasoline could be balanced out by this upward demand for corn ethanol for sustainable aviation fuel. If we're able to hold the line, we don't put any more anchors towards biofuel production in our corn space that we have now, the net effect could be a modest improvement in water quality because of the to-do list you have to put on your field in order for corn to qualify as sustainable aviation fuel.
Do
So
these
it's rather
row crop
complicated, and there's more to say, but I'll maybe leave it there. Phil, back to you.
do these cover crops fix nitrogen?
No, so the legume family of crops fix nitrogen. These are not in the legume family, so there's a modest additional fertilizer application, but because they are operating in the fall and spring when we see most of the nutrient leaching from these fields, and they're actively taking nutrients out of the soil and fixing it in the vegetation manner, we tend to see that about 97% reduction in nitrate loss from fertilizers from fields with camelina and pennygrass in place.
I understand a lot of the nitrogen is lost when there's no cover. That's the big thing. But of course, corn is a shallow rooted plant. It's not doing as a good job of carbon sequestration that other plants might. So, you know, as environmentalists, we'd love to see some other plants on the landscape that aren't monoculture core. But I think the corn lobbyists are there at the Capitol pretty strong, aren't they? Pushing for this in terms of the ethanol. And I think we can be a voice for Forever Green initiative, right? And camelina and these things that are more sustainable. So I do really appreciate your presentation, and we're going to be sharing your slides with folks. Feel free to put a link in the chat, and we will of course send things out later. Thank you, Trevor. All right. And with that, I think we need to shift gears here to talk a little bit about state action. Let's see if I can share my screen quickly here. Sorry, we're moving kind of quickly from topic to topic tonight, but we had a lot to share. So this slide shows some people protesting at the Capitol. I think that was International Women's Day, one of the protests there. And then the bottom slide is the Rise and Repair rally. And you may see some faces there you recognize. Some of you may be in that crowd. I think Owen might still be on the call. He was one of the key organizers for this activity, which was amazing. We're very proud to align with Rise and Repair, which pulls together a coalition of groups that believe in environmental justice and protecting Indigenous rights. So I'm going to get my cursor back. Excuse me. Okay. There has been so many bills that have come up. It's really been a job to keep track of it. And so I'm just going to take a stab at a few here today, but I can't do them all. It would take way too long. But one of the things that I'm hearing from our legislators is that they want to make sure we protect Amara's loss, that industry is definitely putting pressure on them to roll back these things that would ban PFAS in different products. We know that this is cancer causing. We know that it's damaging to the environment. It's in our soil, it's in our water. It's measured in parts per billion because it's so dangerous. So I've highlighted a few bills here. On the first one, what you're going to see, unfortunately, is that it has Grant Hochschild's name on it. He is a Senate Democrat. So if you're up in Grant's district, please let him know that this is something you're very concerned about. We don't want these things in the environment. If you are, the next one is about commercial and industrial products exempted. There's also one that I didn't list here on cadmium and lead in some products. So there's a whole set of bills pushing back on the progress we made to protect you, our environment, right? So we want to make sure that we act on this. MCA has an action alert that you may want to take a look at. These are always kind of canned letters that you can put your name on it. It helps if you add to it, but you can also just read it and write your own letter so that it's more unique. And there's that lead and cadmium one. I guess I did add it in, House File 737. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that, but that's the action alert. So if we go to the next slide here, another topic, This is a huge bill, House File 9, Senate File 572. It is basically trying to go back on our clean energy goals for clean electricity. It delays the carbon-free standard for clean electricity very easily if the prices are too high. And so if I were an electric utility and I wanted to have more time, I could just raise my prices. And then the legislature would say, sure, you can have 3 more years, and they can keep doing that. It also prioritizes carbon capture, which I think Hudson talked about a little bit. This is greenwashing at best. It's mostly done to help the oil industry get more oil out of their wells. It's really not a solution, and farmers don't want these carbon pipelines across their fields. They're fighting it, and we need to fight it too. It also lifts the nuclear moratorium, and I know not everybody on the call may be in agreement, but this caucus has taken a stand and voted on this a few times that we do not support lifting this moratorium or promoting nuclear. We think it's a false solution. If you'd like more information, Greg and I will share Dr. Mark Jacobson's presentation on this, where he went into a lot of detail. I also want to mention, and I don't know, Greg, if you have the link to put in the chat. Remember Professor Ramana is presenting on small nuclear reactors tomorrow night. And I would encourage you, if you want to learn more about that, and he will be speaking on Zoom. And I think maybe Greg can put the Zoom link in, or Tina I know has it too. All right, the other thing is it allows these big, huge mega hydroelectric dams to count towards 100% renewable energy. We're thinking, I don't know, in talking to Patty Acom, that this is probably more trying to count electricity we get from Canada, where they do have some of these larger dams. But we want our utilities to not cheat and say they're making gains by reducing our carbon footprint when they're doing it more by importing. We can have our own sources of electricity like wind and solar here that are going to be much better. So this bill, we hope will go away, but we need to make sure that it's opposed. It is going to be moving on into the House Energy Committee and referred to Ways and Means. So bad bill, horrible. And we testified against it, as did pretty much all the environmental groups. Another topic that is really a hot topic right now in Minnesota is all the data centers that are being proposed. And these aren't your normal mega centers that are data centers that we already have. These are mega centers that I heard it described the size of, like, I don't know, 50 targets, just ridiculous. And there's a law here that they're proposing to give huge tax exemptions to these data centers. They already get some, but this would extend it to give them even more. And, you know, look at who's behind these. These are the richest billionaires in the world that own these companies that want these data centers. And then our governor and our some of our legislators are telling us we got to cut programs. We can't give as much to people that need services because, you know, we've got to balance the budget. So, you know, how about not on our backs? How about we get these billionaires to pay their fair share? And if you're going to put a data center in Minnesota, how about you make a law that it has to have its own energy source, and, you know, that's renewable, and that they have to pay for it, right? So we don't want them coming in and creating issues for our future. If you haven't seen Jen McEwen's video, she really blasts them. She's amazing. She's one of our environmental champions from Duluth. There's another bill that's equally problematic that is about allowing diesel generators, not just a huge number of diesel generators for backup for these data centers. I think it's like 250 of them that would be needed. And the idea would be if they had a power outage that they've got a backup source, but diesel is like very dirty fuel. They're very loud, and they might not need to use them, but they need to run them weekly to check out that they're still working. And this is done often in residential neighborhoods. So the noise, the climate pollution, this is a really, really bad idea. This is another one we want to make sure that we speak out against. And for those of you that want to take some action tonight, put me on mute, call the governor, okay? say no tax cuts for billionaires. We want you to fund our future. Here's this phone number. Jot down this number. If you don't do it tonight, do it when we're done. Leave a message. Call tomorrow. Let them know that you are totally against this. So another bill came up in the House, the legacy funding, the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund. This is what comes from lottery money and funds many, many great environmental projects, including research on invasive species, restoring native habitats, protecting wildlife populations. I've used it to take students to do river studies. It paid for the busing and for the equipment. It was amazing. And that's how people really learn to appreciate the wild, is to be out in it, right? And to experience it. So this bill, as written originally and presented in the House, was exactly what was wanted. It matched the Senate version, but unfortunately the Republicans couldn't leave it alone. They cut the community grant program that had been added. Now, big NGOs have grant writers to help them do this. The problem was some of this money wasn't getting to smaller community projects where, it was maybe an individual like me who wanted to write a grant for Lakeville Friends of the Environment or some other smaller community group. Or it also had language in there talking about communities that had been not covered as much, that have been disadvantaged, that are being exposed to cumulative impacts of this pollution and not seeing not getting the benefits of these grants. So unfortunately, there's an amendment to remove all this stuff. And there's a MEP Action Alert. This is Minnesota Environmental Partnership, another excellent organization that we often team up with. Please do the Action Alert and say, get rid of that amendment, pass it, the original bill. And then, of course, I think I saw Lori Ollinger on here. She's part of the Zero Waste Coalition. There are other people probably on this call who are. I think Sierra Club is also. And we want to make sure that this year we pass that e-waste bill. It came close last year. They objected to who was paying for the collection of the e-waste. And this year they made it the manufacturer's responsibility to pay for that. And we think we're going to get it across the finish line. We hope so. But it would really be great for you to contact your legislature. You'll see a link at the bottom here for Clean Water Action. And they would love your help contacting your legislature to help get that done. And this slide's an important one. If you've been to our other forums, we've shared this information before. There's a list of legislative priorities that'll list all the bills that we're tracking on different issues, and maybe some issues where we don't see bills, but our priority issues at our caucus. I update this often. And if you think I'm missing something, please reach out to me. I'm one person. I need help with this, okay? But we're trying to keep track of where bills are and what needs attention. It's most beneficial if you write to your own representative. If you don't know who that is, there's easy ways to find that out. Learn who your senator is, who your House member is, look at what committees they're on, who are the membership. So if there's an important committee meeting coming up on Monday or Tuesday, there's a combined calendar you can look at that lists all those meetings, and you can click on the meeting title. It's with Environment Natural Resources, and click on the title and it'll tell you, you can click on the members and write to them and let them know what you think about those bills. If you get your thoughts together early, you can send in written testimony. We've been doing that as a caucus. Other environmental groups are doing that too. It's very important. If you get it in 24 hours before the meetings, they become part of the meeting packet. You have to submit it as a PDF file to the liaison, the legislator assistant that works with that committee, and they will print them and give them a packet to the legislature, so your words will be there in a collection to show that you care. And you don't need to be an expert. It's really just you. What do you think about this? Why? What do you want them to do? Right? You're their constituent, or you're a member of the state and they're voting on your behalf. And also, again, please call the governor, because he's going to have a say in a lot of this stuff, right? Bills come to him. He makes some decisions. He puts pressure on them to bring bills forward. And this is important action. And we do have handouts. Greg, I don't know if you're putting any of these links in the chat, but we do have handouts with help about how to write an email, and all of these things that we've covered before in our talks. So thank you, everybody. That was really whirlwind. And again, it's not really specific to next week. I just picked some of the key issues that have been really hot topics for this meeting. If you're not getting weekly updates from us, Greg has been helping me. I kind of put together a list of some bills that are coming up and get input from other people too. And then we've been sending that out to anyone who is on our Substack list. These are Environmental Caucus members, and it's very easy to join and get on that list. And then Greg will send it to you. Greg, how many people are we sending that to recently?
Just under 2,000.
Okay, so it's a good group of people, and some people are showing up at the Capitol. Some people are quietly working behind the scenes. It all helps. We need all of you to resist these bad bills and help promote the good ones, like the e-waste bill. All right, and I know we've gone, our time is maybe a little short, but Greg, did you want to talk a little bit about National Alert? I'm showing one here, of course, the Sierra Club, right? We want to keep our national parks and our people that work there, and state parks.
Did you want me to talk about Indivisible a little bit?
Sure.
Going this, I'll be really quick here. In parallel with all this DFL work we're doing, we're also doing a lot of work with Indivisible, which most of you by now have heard of. And it's a grassroots organization. It's not partisan. However, we openly reject every Republican elected as a valid representative of anything going on right now, pretty much. I just want to make a few points. First, we're huge. This is just a map of known groups known to the national organization, and that's about 50% of the actual group. So there's about 2,000 different indivisible groups across the country. Okay, next slide. And we're also very small. This is just the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and there's 20 dots on here, and that is, again, about half the known groups in this area. There's about, between Plymouth and Hastings and Stillwater and Shakopee, there's about 40 groups, and about half of them have emerged since November 5th.
And growing. People are showing up at the meetings. We have one in my small area, yes.
And they're growing. The group that I'm mostly working with, which is West Metro, Indivisible West Metro, was a little over 200 in October. We are now just under 2,000 members. Okay. And it's based on this book. And you can go online and find it, The Practical Guide to Democracy. It's designed to, it has a matrix essentially of, are you red or blue? And then, what is your level of government you're working with? And you can figure out what strategies you take to deal with, like, for example, we all live in this place where our senators are Democrats. Many of us live in places where we have Republican representatives in the House. What do we do, depending on who they are, as far as our strategies go, when we're trying to make action? Next slide. Just to give you we are also very fast and fast on our feet. This is two examples. On the right, on about the first of the month, a couple of us said, "Hey, let's have a demonstration." It's like, let's put out a play. Let's have a demonstration. And Kimberly Wilburn and I together probably spent 2 hours organizing it, and we had 350 people on the streets in Plymouth with signs for 2 hours in the snow and the wind. That was not hard. On the left, on January 27th, we were sitting around thinking we could get about 30 people to sit down with minor staffers from Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith's office. About 300 people showed up to converse about this, figuring out what to do. On the morning of the event, we were talking to the minor staffers about what we wanted to happen. And they said, wait a second. And they got their chiefs of staff on the phone. And they said, hold on a second. I think we'll have some special guests. By later that afternoon, we had both senators on a Zoom call with 2,000 people from Minnesota. So that's big. And that's something that people are just showing up. People want to do this stuff. It's actually pretty impressive. And last slide, please. As a member of the DFL, you all know, I gave a talk about Indivisible at a Senate district recently, in which I noted that Indivisible was a major player in removing Eric Paulson and replacing him with Dean Phillips in the 3rd district. And I noted, just sort of tongue in cheek, if you hear a Democrat talking about it, a DFLer talking about it, the DFL will take credit for this. The truth is that Phillips ran an amazing campaign, and that's why he won. But outside of that, Indivisible had a huge impact. And soon after I finished, a major DFLer, I won't mention any names, arrived, having not heard my talk, and then went ahead and proceeded to take credit for that event. You hear it all the time. We are Indivisible are putting good people on school boards across the state. We're putting good people in city councils across the state, and we're helping House and Senate members win across the state, and we're helping where we can with federal elections. And in the early days, Indivisible is the organization that saved the Affordable Care Act. We are the ones that did that. Everybody says it was John McCain. Well, okay. It was the pressure across the country in thousands of halls for several weeks that caused him to give the thumbs down or whatever he did. We are now involved with other groups in developing massive demonstrations. And I just want to mention, and small ones, and affecting the Senate leadership. And I want to end by just noting that if you don't know it already, April 5th is the day of national mobilization being organized by Indivisible. So go to the Capitol or find out if your local group is having a local alternative. In Plymouth, Minnetonka, I know a lot of people who can't make it to the Capitol, so we'll be out of Vicksburg by the movie theater holding up, or by the library holding up signs, and every local group will have something. And by the way, those groups at Tesla, the ones that are not burning down the cars, but are peacefully demonstrating at Tesla plants, that's also us. So we're active everywhere, very grassroots and very active. And please join your local Indivisible group if you haven't already. And if you can't find a local group, start one.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. And we need everybody, right? We need all boots on the ground. Absolutely. This is, we're definitely in a crisis situation here. So I want to thank all our presenters. Everyone's been amazing. And I hope you all have learned something. I know I have. Please keep following us. I'm going to turn it over to Megan here. I don't know if we have time for a question or two, or if we're going to go right to our meeting. So Megan?
Well, our meeting's going to take a very short period of time, so I'm going to do like 2 of the questions that came in. We actually didn't get a ton, but I will do this. Is Steve still on, Schultz?
Yes, it looks like it.
Okay.
I'm here.
Hi. So this is more of a logistical question: is why does HR 978 need more than a majority of votes to pass the Senate?
Okay, yeah. Well, in the Senate, there is still a filibuster. So for debate to end in the Senate, the people who want to get that law passed need 60 votes to, it's called a cloture vote, which would end debate. So in this, and that's for policy. Any policy still needs to be able to get beyond that 60 vote filibuster threshold.
And okay, I'm just going to go down. I have a question from John Peschman. This would be, I think, for Trevor. Wants to know about the status or some questions about the data center in Apple Valley.
Yeah, FMR isn't working, sort of taking a lead role on data center work. We are generally supporting Minnesota Environmental Partnership and Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, along with Freshwater, and their work on that. But I can probably answer a specific question if there's something relevant there.
They were just curious if you knew anything specifically about the Apple Valley City Council one. It looks like it was more of a comment than a statement, but
I do not. I'm happy to look it up while we're talking, though.
And then one other one for you. Someone was asking for more of a definition of power to oil.
So yeah, I think that the phrase there is power to liquid. One of the pathways for sustainable aviation fuel is green hydrogen. And that is sort of the gold standard of long-term sustainable aviation fuel strategies. You can use green hydrogen that is a raw material in developing we'll call it a synthetic aviation fuel that is a drop-in fuel that you could use with existing engines and existing airframes. So that is desirable for the aviation industry because they don't need to build whole new aircraft to make it work. That requires green hydrogen blended with CO2. and that will be converted into a drop in sustainable aviation fuel. That CO2 could come from direct air capture, also powered by renewable energy. That would result in a reasonably net zero form of sustainable aviation fuel. In the near term, the more likely pathway for that pure carbon is going to be carbon captured from the fermentation process at ethanol facilities. And so this sort of dovetails with this broader concern about how do we handle our ethanol economy? How do we transition away from our reliance on summer annual row cropping systems? And how do we balance the risks and benefits of trying to build out carbon capture infrastructure in a way that could potentially capture that carbon and reuse it in a carbon-free application later in the process? But that is one pathway. The other alternative is to use pure hydrogen. However, one of two things has to be the case. You're using it in a gaseous form, in which case it takes up a lot of space. You would need to fundamentally redesign aircraft to be able to carry that much gas on the plane, or you would use it in a liquid format. That needs to be kept at several hundred degrees below 0 Celsius. And that would require a whole different set of fueling, transportation infrastructure, and redesigning aircraft so that the fuel would not convert from a liquid to a gas in the tanks on the plane. And so we see long-term pure hydrogen flight as something that's maybe 30 to 40 years out, but a green hydrogen powered liquid pathway is something that could be in planes in the next 10 years.
Thank you so much. And one other quick question for you that I got. Are you concerned about neonic use?
Neonics, I think that's the question.
Neonic use. I'm sorry. Did I say
Yeah, so
neonic? I should know better.
neonicotinoids are a class of agricultural chemicals that have strong links to pollinator mortality. And so generally our concern with those kinds of cropping applications is you're putting them on your crop field and they never really stay there, whether it is wind driven or from water runoff. Those types of chemicals tend to end up in our environment and are shown to have pretty strong relationships to pollinator mortality. And so while we are working to move away or not over-incentivize the sort of corn ethanol-based pathway for sustainable aviation fuel, putting some downward pressure on our demand for corn to produce biofuels would also downward pressure on overall demand for neonic applications on our agricultural landscape. So we might sort of, I don't want to say kill two birds with one stone, because it's the opposite of that, birth two birds from one egg. Sorry for the tortured metaphor. We think that could have some positive results.
Great, thank you so much. And those are all the questions I have that came in. I think everyone else that put it in there, it also got answered somewhere along the way. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers tonight. Everyone's expertise, all this knowledge, Vida, its activism at the Capitol to give us all that information on bills. And Greg has been doing so much with the West Metro Indivisible. I know some of these groups kind of came and went. I know the one up here in International Falls fizzled a couple of years ago, but we might see a resurrection, as I know the one in Duluth had like 400 people at their last 4 groups meetings combined, which was pretty incredible. So I just wanted to say thank you for everyone to be here. Vida.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention, I just looked at tomorrow's schedule, and in the Senate at 12:30 in the Energy Committee, with Chair Nick Friends, they are going to hear Matthew's bill. This is the Senate File 1393, that is data center energy generation redundancy establishment. So that's those diesel generators. That's that same bill that's already been heard in the House. It's coming to the Senate, to Nick Friends' committee tomorrow. So again, if you go to the Minnesota legislature, look at the combined calendar rather, and click on that. That would be an important one. There's also a good thing there. McEwen's hearing one on geothermal planning grants right? Geothermal would be clean energy. So again, please check out the calendar. I apologize that I didn't come prepared, having looked at this too much before this meeting. Some of you may know I've been a little busy with something else, but anyway, I'll turn it back to Jen.
Thank you again. Okay, everyone. And with that, I think we're going to conclude our forum and move on to our meeting. So thank you again for all our presenters, for everyone that came. And we do have a couple important things that are going to be happening in our meeting. If everyone would, as many people could stick around as possible, that would be great. I'm going to stop recording this, since we don't usually record our meetings, just our forums, as it's usually just some pretty, about 20 minutes of some boring business. But please, you are all welcome to stay, exactly like Greg said.